Welcome inside the WCBL studios for another edition of the WCBL Report. The fourth episode now. We're 4 weeks into the season, which is insane to think about. And it is our weekly look across the WCBL. And I'm your host, Clark Monroe, here in the IKS Media team. And we are joined today by Joe McFarland, of course, my trusty co-host on the episode here today on the show. Enough about the rainouts, Joe. I'm sick about hearing about rainouts. Can we talk about some baseball today, please?
100%. We've got a ton coming up, but I think the big storyline, to be honest with you, Clark, still has to be kind of a whole back from last week to a certain extent, right? Because the off-field acquisition of the Regina Red Sox still percolating. A lot of question marks heading into this week as to when it's going to happen, how's it going to happen, how's the league going to vote, all that kind of stuff. And we got some finalization of that earlier this week.
Yeah, so I guess the biggest thing there was it sounds like the governors of the league have approved the purchase. Now, that doesn't mean that everything is finalized yet, but it has been approved by the league, which means they can go ahead and figure out the numbers and figure out all the other stuff. But that's pretty big news, Joe, that the league is fully on board with this because it is a big step, I think, for both Regina and the league itself.
Yeah, and you and I talked about it at pretty big length last week, so we won't get into the bit nuts and bolts of it. But obviously, there's still going to be business as usual for the rest of this calendar season. And then October 1st is when the deal is actually closed and everybody can start moving offices and that kind of stuff. And Mr. Gary Brotzel and company can start to figure out what their roles are going to be on the baseball side while Sean and company, Sean Semple and Queen City Sports and Entertainment can figure out how they're going to navigate the current terrain and start bringing some roles to certain individuals to move that brand forward, move not just the brand forward, but I think also the big piece in Regina is the stadium piece, right, and how that's all going to come into play in the next couple of years here.
Yeah, and that should be one to keep an eye on for sure. That might be a weekly report kind of update thing for us, Joe, as we go forward with this show, is just keeping an eye on what's going on there. But there might be a little bit of an adjustment at the park for the end of this season. I'm just going to throw that teaser in there. I'm going to throw that grenade and walk away. That's all I'm going to say. But
what could it be?
Speaking of fun days at the park and good experiences at the park, Joe, there was one specifically that I want to point out before we talk about the rest of the weekend and the start of this week, and that was back on Sunday at Okotoks, at Siemens Stadium in Okotoks, I should say. It was Princess in the Park Day, Joe.
Yes.
Look at this. Tons of families out there. It sounded like a great time. And this is a great way, Joe, to kind of maybe bring in some people that might not normally want to go to a ballpark, but they had a ton of fun by the looks of it.
Absolutely. And I'm a big fan of the game day promotions and stuff like that. For those who don't know, for a long time, I had the role of game day host with the Calgary Hitmen and Calgary Stampeders. And I may have been known to have dressed up on occasion, not as a princess. I dressed up as Slash from Guns N' Roses one year for the Stampeders. That kind of stuff is so much fun. And again, to your point, brings out a different crowd, right? And especially in that case, you're welcoming families. And so the Dogs do a great job of stuff like that. I know a ton of teams around the league do stuff like that. It's why we see stuff like new jerseys, new brands. I know we can talk about that if you want to in a little bit as well. Like there's a lot of different different jerseys they roll out. I know the Dogs have those new blue tropical jerseys that they brought out for their alternates, and the Saskatoon Berries coming out with the Blackberries brand earlier this week. Like there's a few little, like, you can have fun with baseball, and that's the best part about it, and Sunday was no exception.
Yeah, just for the record, Joe, I think you would look fantastic in a tutu, okay? But let's move on. Lots of rain on Saturday, so there was a lot of doubleheaders on Sunday and earlier yesterday as well, just to get some rescheduling done. And there's more games coming up that will be rescheduled down the road. But when the dust settled, maybe one of the bigger storylines this past week was maybe Sylvan Lake. Can you tell me what happened with them?
We said it, kind of primed it up last week, right? We said that both Sylvan Lake and Energy City were going for their Eastern road trip. And a lot of, I kind of called it the barometer, right? You got East versus West. It's always hard to figure out whether you're a good team in a bad division or a bad team in a good division. And as it turns out, the Sylvan Lake Gulls had a bit of a run-in in Saskatchewan. They got swept by the Regina Red Sox and the Saskatoon Berries. It's not an easy road trip to begin with. And those two teams had their way with the or with the Sylvan Lake Gulls, and kind of to the surprise, especially for those who are looking at Sylvan going, hey, this might be a championship caliber squad this year. They really want to get over that hump to beat the Okotoks Dogs, and they go 0 for 4. And as a result, they drop in the standings, they drop in the power rankings. Then, of course, Tuesday night, what do? They get back home, get some home cooked meals, and they put the thump into the Moose Jaw Miller Express. So, who's to say what'll happen in a week's time? But for sure, this past week was a rough one for Sylvan Lake.
Yeah, and I was at the Energy City Regina game on Thursday last week, and boy, that was a fantastic game. Back and forth, big comeback midway through the game by Energy City, big home run to take the lead in a 6-run inning. I think it was a grand slam to take the lead, and then they held on to it the rest of the way. But it ended up, I can't remember the final score. I want to say it was like 11-10 or something like that. But it was a tight, close game all the way to the end. Really exciting. But yeah, Energy City, 2 wins in Regina. Then they 2 losses to Saskatoon. Nobody can seem to beat Saskatoon in Saskatoon, so you can't really blame them. But let's have a look, Joe, just at the scoreboards here from the last few days. We'll take a look at Sundays here. As you can see, some of these games were to make up for some of the rainouts on Saturday, and then there was a couple extra rainouts, of course, as well. But there was a doubleheader. You mentioned Sylvan Lake losing 2 to the Regina Red Sox. We mentioned Energy City losing 2 to Saskatoon. Medicine Hat took a 7-1 win over Moose Jaw, and Lethbridge took a 7-2 win over Okotoks. That was massive, actually, that game, and we'll talk about that in a second as to why that game was so massive. On Monday, this was a fun one, Joe. It was a schools out game in Lethbridge. It was a 1:05 start time. They had a bunch of kids out from schools across Lethbridge, but Brooks spoiled it all. It was a 10-5 win for Brooks. They made everybody go home sad. So congrats, Brooks, on that. You made everybody feel sad. And then we move on to Tuesday, except for them, the Brooks Bombers fans, of course.
There's no crying in baseball. Where's that clip?
Right, yeah. We have that, don't we? I think Bryce has that somewhere. He might.
Are you crying?
Yeah. Yeah, you cry.
There's no crying in baseball!
Thank you, Bryce. Then a doubleheader on last night, of course, Energy City taking on Lethbridge. Now, these were 2 home games for Energy City, of course, as they continue their figuring out their home schedule when they don't have a home stadium. 13-2 both times, though. Yikes. Not a fun day for Energy City. And then a 10-4 win, a big one. That's a big one if you look at that on the top right corner there. Saskatoon beating Regina 10-4. That's a big one. And again, we'll talk about why in a second. Sylvan Lake, 9-1 win, like Joe just mentioned, over Moose Jaw. Brooks with an 8-7 win over Okotoks. Again, a big game. And we'll talk about why in a second. Weyburn with a really great 3-2 win over Medicine Hat. We're going to talk about that game, Joe, in just a moment, and you'll figure out why, because it was a pretty cool storyline. And then Fort Mac with a 4-2 win in the Battle of the Basement Dwellers. But it's a big win for Fort Mac with a 4-2 win over Swift Current. So that brings us back into the studio here, Joe. Anything from that you want to touch on before we head into looking at some individual stats?
Yeah, it's funny. You and I usually text each other on the Monday morning and go, hey, what are the big storylines? Like, what might be play of the week? And we start talking about those things. And then we should probably stop that practice, because by Tuesday night, we're texting each other again going, throw all the plans into the wood chipper, because all of them changed. Like player of the week changed, everything and that's the nature of the beast, right? And especially when you see some of the performances that have been put up over the course of the last couple of weeks here. Again, I keep going back to that first couple of weeks. We were like, man, this can be a hitter season. Like, everybody's smoking bombs. Now we saw some 3-2 scores. We've seen some shutouts in the last couple of weeks here. Some great pitching. Things are starting to really even out on that front. And to your point, with the standings jostling out the way they are, every game is starting to be a little bit bigger, even though we are not even to the start of July yet. Like, we've still got a full month and a half left of the season. But I think every team's starting to figure out where their place in the playoff picture might be. Because you know full well that you want to be in a good spot heading into July versus playing from behind.
Yeah, well, let's look at those standings now to kind of see where we are at with that playoff picture. Yes, it's early, but it's still very important to check it out. As you can see, the reason why I mentioned that Lethbridge-Okotoks game on Sunday was so important is because it actually gave Lethbridge the lead in the West Division, and Okotoks losing to Brooks yesterday, which I also pointed out, kept them in second place. So Okotoks looking to get back into first place now. Sylvan Lake, like you mentioned earlier, a tough road trip in Saskatchewan. 11-11, hitting or playing 500 baseball right now. Generally, you're not upset with that, but I know Sylvan Lake has some pretty high expectations. So I'm sure they're kind of scratching their heads right now to kind of figure out what's going on there. Energy City, 8-14, might not look super sexy, Joe, but they have been playing some really good baseball lately. Brooks too at 6-12, and Fort Max not going away with a 6-13 record there. And then in the East, Saskatoon, clearly the golden standard right now of the league, 18-3. I don't believe yet that they've lost a game at home, so they're holding strong at home. Medicine Hat 15-7. Of course, they came out hot early, scoring a ton of runs. They're still putting up some good scores. Regina. The reason I mentioned Regina and Moose Jaw so closely earlier when we were talking about the scores, they are neck and neck. Every single win or loss for these guys right now could determine moving up or down in the standings. So they are playing some really close games right now and trying to figure themselves out. And then, as we can see, Weyburn and Swift Current down at the bottom of the East. But again, Swift Current's kind of come around a little bit in the last week or two. Weyburn's playing some solid ball, maybe just not getting a couple bounces here and there. I don't think they're necessarily a 7-13 team. I think they could be a little bit higher up on the standings before too long, Joe. But did anything stand out there that you want to just touch on before we move on to power rankings?
Yeah, and both happen to be in the West Division, and we'll start with Sylvan Lake. Think about their record last year. 44-12. They set the record for most wins in a season, in a WCBL season. They've already lost 11 games.
Yeah.
Now, I did say in the season preview show that, yeah, they set the regular season record for wins, but they'd rather be 33 and 24, 23. Math is hard at this time of day.
Yes.
But if they can win a WCBL championship, if they can pick up 3 extra wins at the end of the season, overtake Okotoks, and then go to the championship. Yeah, they're not at the pace that they were at last year, but it's interesting to note that they had 12 losses all last year, and they're already up to 11. The other one, you kind of mentioned the East and how Swift and Weyburn might be better teams than the record show. I still contend that Fort Max in that same boat too, because they've had a really interesting start to the season. They had a really tough series against Lethbridge where they were winning or losing 3-1, 3-2 ball games.
Right.
A bounce here and a bounce there, and they're easily closing in on Sylvan Lake for third in that division, right? So there's that level of the margin of error. That's the word I wanted to use. The margin of error in this league is getting slimmer and slimmer and slimmer. And as the season progresses, teams are getting tighter. They're getting more used to each other, their nuances, that kind of stuff. It's only going to get better from here.
Yeah, exactly. Let's bring up the power rankings just to kind of see maybe how some teams are moving up and down. Now, as we mentioned, I think I mentioned it last week, but the power rankings came out on Tuesday morning. We've had a game since, so if the last 10 look weird or for any reason, there has been one game played since the power rankings came out. So just keep that in mind. But generally, I think it's pretty clear across the board who's where and why they're there. As you can see, there are some movers up. Weyburn has moved up a couple spots. Brooks has moved down a couple spots. Fort Max moved down a couple spots. So we've seen some movement everywhere, really. The only team to stand put is the Saskatoon Berries. So an interesting movers and shakers kind of list there across the league. But let's talk about the player of the week. We talked about that Weyburn game, that 3-2 game against Medicine Hat. And we'll get into the stats in a minute. But the reason I want to do the player of the week first is because it kind of transitions nicely into the stats. So why is Ian Heck our player of the week, Joe?
My goodness gracious, did Ian Heck have himself a week? And it kind of all started as a player or as a hitter. Now, everybody knows he's an all-star. He's a two-way guy. He's the Shohei of the Weyburn Beavers, who was fantastic last year. 5 games at the dish, and he goes 11 for 24, 3 doubles, a homer, and 8 RBI. None of those RBI were any bigger than last night, Tuesday night, against Medicine Hat.
Medicine Hat, yep.
Walks off the Mavericks in dramatic fashion in that contest, which he started, by the by. Got 6 innings, allowed, 1 run on 5 hits, a couple of walks, and struck out 10. It was an okay day at the on both sides of the ball for Ian Heck. He is definitely worthy. Although I have to say, There were a couple of others who were really close, and this goes to that point that we were talking about earlier, where I said we had plans, and the
Yes.
plans kind of failed because on Sunday night,
Well, let's bring up
Kai
the
Langford.
pitcher stats, the
Okay,
pitching stats leaders, because this will kind of showcase what you're talking about as you're talking about it here, Joe, too.
there's two guys at the top of this list who had phenomenal Sundays. Kai Langford was my player of the week heading into Tuesday night. He on Sunday goes up against Sylvan Lake at home, 7-inning complete game gem, 0 runs, 3 hits, 2 walks, 4 strikeouts, and an 8-0 Red Sox win. The other guy, Levi Abbott, who was the player of the week last year, could have easily repeated, but that bum in Lethbridge allowed 1 run on 1 hit, 8 strikeouts in a 7-2 win in dangerous territory. It was against Okotoks, in the danger zone, and Levi Abbott was phenomenal, and his ERA balloons to 0.45 on the season.
Yeah, and speaking of
My
that,
goodness.
we were joking just before the show because I've been seeing Blake Johnson's numbers here. And Blake came in. He didn't start the game on Thursday against Energy City, but he came in and threw 5 innings. And he had 1 bad inning where he let up 6 runs. Not all of them were earned runs, but his ERA ballooned, like you said, to 166. So he's still having a fantastic year. It just kind of shows how good of a year he's having if he can let up 6 runs and still only have a 166 ERA. Let's have a look at the hitting leaders now. Not much in terms of new names on this list, but still the impressive numbers that are being put up across the board. We talked about Connor Roth a lot last week. He's still doing it. Still putting up numbers, still hitting over 450 on the season. A couple other guys have maybe popped up. I think Timo Aracena had a really good few games. He's up over 400 now. Austin Gurney is holding tight at 400 for Moose Jaw. Who stands out for you, though, on this list?
There's a really interesting story that the Western Wheels Remy Greer put together on Barry Eisman. I apologize now for whether or not I butchered his last name, but he played for Okotoks last year in the early going, and then at the All-Star break had to go back home for orientation festivities in his college. So he missed out on the opportunity to play in the championship. And he said, this year I want it in. I'm here for the entire summer, and I'm going to do everything in my power to help the Dogs four-peat here. And he's doing his fair share and has become a really big piece to an Okotoks Dogs offense. It's missing some key pieces from last year, like Brendan Luther, Caleb Lombard, and Tucker Zadunik. So really cool to see Barry Eisman coming and doing what he does best.
Yeah, that's a super cool story there. Let's have a look at the home run leaders quick, just to see who's popping the ball out of the park. You see Wilmer Henriquez. He was on the hitting leader list as well. 6 home runs on the season. Again, you can see there, Joe, the most important part, or most impressive part about that is he's had like 20 fewer at-bats than most of the players in the league right now, and he's still doing it in a big way. Trevor Dale has snuck up into the tie for the lead as well. Tyler Vanesti, he hit a home run this week to get back up to that 5 number. 2 guys with Saskatoon, Corey Wooters and Ethan Murdoch, have had fantastic seasons. And the list goes on. Benito Bonilla, I mean, we talk about low at-bat numbers. Look at that. That guy doesn't need much time to hit home runs. He just does it. So anytime Benito Bonilla gets up to the plate, look out. It could be out of the park very soon. As we move on, Joe, I wanted to touch on this one. We didn't talk about this game yet, but it did happen this weekend. I don't know if you saw, you did because we talked about it, but I'm just going to frame it this way. I don't know if you saw Saturday's scoreboard, Joe, but there was a 25-14 game in a baseball game.
What?
Yeah, not a football game. It was Swift Current and Weyburn. Swift Current picked up the win in this one, but it was an unbelievably wild way of how that went about. It wasn't just like high scoring all the way. What happened in this game, and why is this the Pile of Bones play of the week?
I gotta say, I've seen wild score changes, right? Team goes up 4-0, team comes back, goes up 7-4, then the other team comes back and it's 8-7. I've seen that before. I don't know if I've ever seen a team go up 11-0 and then 14-3 at one point before the other team says, okay, maybe we should probably play some offense too. Comes back, flips it, and ends up winning by 11. And that's exactly what happened between the Swift Current 57s and Weyburn Beavers. And that takes us to a rather weird point of the game. Bottom
Hit
5.
deep, hit back, and with one swing of the bat, the 57s have a 1-run lead. Braxton Vale, whammo!
Unbelievable
Whammo
call.
indeed, right? Like that was a great call.
Yeah.
But that was the official let's turn the page on the game and went from 0-0 to now 1-0. Although at that point I think it was like 14-13, something like that, 13-12. Yeah, that was a wild one. And it wasn't like there was a bunch of home runs, there's a few, but that was probably the piece de resistance on a 25-14 crazy game.
Yeah, and otherwise, just kind of a regular. It was a big home run. Obviously, you saw his bat flip there. We kind of highlighted that in the clip there. But the one tweet that I saw over the weekend, and apologies to who it was because I can't remember who it was that said it. But it might have been you, Joe. Somebody said, "I've never seen a team lead by 11 and also lose by 11 in the same game." So that's a very impressive, wild game. So there you go. There's the Pile of Bones play of the week, courtesy of Braxton Vale. You got some alumni updates, Joe. There's 3 of them. What can you tell me about who's a WCBL alumni who's making their way in pros?
There's 3. We try to do 3 every week, and I could add 4. Tristan Peters' name should be on the list again because he had a grand slam last night for the Durham Bulls and has just been bananas for them as he tries every moment of every day, it seems, having a phenomenal June. At some point, even the Okotoks Dogs were like, call him up already. He's been phenomenal. But one other guy from the Dogs, formerly of the Dogs, who has turned a lot of heads is Gavin Logan. And he's a draft pick of the Arizona Diamondbacks and spent the last couple of years in high A with the Hillsboro Hops. He gets promoted. And at first, everybody's thinking it's a depth move, right? He bypasses AA, goes straight to AAA with Reno Aces, gets his first game in on June 19th as a defensive replacement. Everybody's okay, par for the course. Comes in as a starter on the 20th, and he just goes 3 for 3 with a double and his first RBI as a AAA baseball player. And he followed that up on Tuesday night, going 2 for 5 with a double as well. Like I said, depth move at first, turning out pretty well for the Reno Aces. A couple of other guys. Jacob Webb, former Medicine Hat Maverick pitcher, has been, over the last 6 years or so, been a depth guy in the bullpen for a few different teams. Was with Baltimore last year, is with Texas this year. Doing it all over again. He's 4-3 this season, already 31 appearances out of the pen for the Rangers, 4.11 ERA. And we'll wrap things up with a real good feel-good story for you here. And it's Eric Radicek, 2024 pick of the Miami Marlins, came to Brooks a couple of seasons ago and had almost written off baseball. He's just like, I'm going to come out and see if I can have some fun. We'll go. He was thinking of quitting. He's I think an avid fisherman maybe. But the feel-good part of it is he's type 1 diabetic and was open to sharing the story and was just really enjoying life more than anything else. Put on a show when he was in Brooks and was an all-star, had a phenomenal run, earns himself a spot with Niagara University, gets himself drafted, and he's been really good in high A with the Sky Carp and Beloit. He's 241 and I think his 19 RBI. Hit his second home run of the season earlier this week. So a tip of the cap to Eric Radicek, Jacob Webb, and Gavin Logan.
That's awesome. Yeah, love hearing those updates from guys who have played their way through this league and then moved on to bigger and better things. That's awesome to see. There's some games coming up here, Joe, that I wanted to just kind of focus on as we kind of wrap up the show here. As we look at tonight's schedule, we'll have a look at Wednesday. Here. If you saw my game day video, which came out a couple hours ago by the time you guys are watching this, that'll clear things up a little bit, but there is some interesting stuff going on in Fort Mac this week, and I'll get to that in a sec. But Regina and Saskatoon have a rematch of last night's game in Regina, but it's up in Saskatoon this time. Weyburn is going to host Medicine Hat again in a rematch of what Joe mentioned, the Ian Heck game, we'll call it, last night, the 3-2 win. So they'll rematch. Sylvan Lake is rematching against Moose Jaw after their 9-1 win last night. Okotoks is going to be facing Brooks, and then Fort Mac is taking on Swift Current. Now, the interesting thing starts tomorrow. As you can see, Legacy Dodge Field shows up several times on this board. 3 games tomorrow night at Legacy Dodge Field in Fort McMurray, as there's a little bit of a mini tournament going on as Energy City continues to try to find their home game somewhere. They found them. They're in Fort Mac. So there's 2 games. They play back-to-back Energy City plays back-to-back against Swift Current and then Moose Jaw. And then Moose Jaw stays on the field to play Fort Mac later at 7:05. Then Sylvan Lake is taking on Brooks at 7:05. Medicine Hat against Regina in a battle of two of the top Eastern teams. And then Lethbridge Okotoks. That's a massive game with a lot on the line tomorrow night in Spitz Stadium in Lethbridge. And then on Friday, some more funny stuff going on at Legacy Dodge Field. Energy City plays Swift Current again. Fort Mac plays Moose Jaw again. And then you can see Regina and Medicine Hat. Again, they flip venue, or I think they play again in Medicine Hat. Sylvan Lake continues to play Brooks, and Okotoks takes on Weyburn. We aren't going to show you, but over the course of the weekend and then into Monday as well, there are more games at Legacy Dodge Field between Energy City and Fort Mac. So it's like a week-long stay for Energy City in Fort Mac, basically, with like upwards of 5 or 6 games. So it's an interesting little funny part of the schedule, just with Energy City figuring out where their home games are at. But also Canada Day is going to be next Tuesday, so that'll be a topic for us next week. But anything else stand out for you, Joe, looking forward to the next week?
I was just going to say the hotel and restaurant industry in Fort McMurray must be just salivating when they see that the WCBL's got 4 teams in town for a weekend right before Canada Day. They'll be pretty happy with how things are. It's kind of, if we could use a slap shot analogy to a certain extent, where it's that's some old time baseball right there, the old tournament between league teams playing against one another, and so that'll be a fun weekend to watch, or I guess not even a weekend, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and Monday, I guess, in Fort Mac. And to your point, Canada Day is going to be the big one. There's a couple of double headers around the league as well. I know Weyburn's in Lethbridge. I'm going to be part of the broadcast there. I'm looking forward to my return to Lethbridge and seeing some familiar faces there. And again, I think the big part now is you're starting to see some of the teams and some of the players start to elevate themselves. And a little birdie told me that some of the teams are starting to put together their plans for the All-Star game, which happens July 19th in Okotoks. And so they're trying to figure out, hey, which players should be nominated and that kind of thing. I have a feeling the Ian Hex, the Levi Abbotts, and the Kai Langfords of the group might be asked, hey, do you want to throw an inning or two in Okotoks in front of a sold-out Siemens Stadium crowd? I think so. So it'll be interesting to see not only the coaching announcements, but the player announcements and everything else coming up over the next couple of weeks here.
Yeah, with next week being the start of July, by the time we do this show, we probably will have a little bit more information on the All-Star game for you by then. So maybe stay tuned for that next week. But Joe, appreciate all your insight, all your coverage, and all your analysis every single week, but this week specifically. Appreciate your time here today. Thanks for joining us. For Bryce and the entire crew, because it sounds like there's a whole crew in the back today. There they are. Look at them. Look at them. There's like 4 of them back there, and I think there's one off camera as well. So it's a busy back room there today here at IKS Media. Appreciate all those guys. And for everybody who tuned in to watch or listen, appreciate you guys as well. It's going to be a big week in the WCBL. Enjoy the baseball, everyone. For Joe McFarland, we'll see you again next week.
Just a bit outside. He tried the corner and missed.